Alright, so disclaimer, this is my opinion. Please don't roast me too bad in the comments. Though I do like constructive criticism. Helps me learn from my mistakes. Anyway, hello everyone and welcome back. I know it's been an entire year since my previous upload. However, I'm back with a video that I haven't seen anywhere else yet on YouTube, and I feel like I should go ahead and do that today, which is to review the collection of epic battle fantasy games and rank them from worst to best. I know that the games play quite differently from each other, making ranking them a bit of an opinionated approach, like all reviews, since there are multiple genres of games being represented here. However, as someone who likes a lot of genre of games, this should be an interesting ranking for me, and hopefully you guys as well. Then after all is said and done, I will also be answering the question of, is buying the collection worth the $8? Feel free to let me know your differences in the ranking in the comments below. I'm curious to see how other fans of this game collection of Kapo Games as a whole think. That all being said, let's get into the video. And for the worst game on the list, it goes to number 8, Cat Cafe. Starting off our list is Cat Cafe. When making the original list for this video, it was difficult for some of the picks, as you will see. However, Cat Cafe is really the only exception to this. I know this game was going to be last for me, and most people would probably agree with me. Probably. Being that's the newest of the games, none of us should be surprised to know this game has pretty good visuals. That's the only compliment I could really give it. That and the cat puns for the drinks were kind of funny to me. Kind of corny as well, but my humor is broken. The game itself is far too simplistic in terms of gameplay, which to me is probably, and others, the most important aspect of a game. You know, gameplay is very important. The only thing you have to do in this game is drag and drop drinks to cats that ask for it, and that's it. Other than happy hour, once you pass the same exact drink type to a bunch of cats before a timer runs out, nothing really special there, to be honest. Another complaint that I have is that there's no music selection for the games, really, nor does it really change much. Music's very boring for me. Dress up mode in this game has the least amount in any of Kapo's games, from what I can tell. And you have to play the game to unlock more options, like you have to purchase certain items. And that kind of stinks, since this game isn't very enjoyable to play for me, and seems like it was made for the target audience of 4 to 5-year-olds. Anyway, for the second worst game on this list, number 7, Mecha Dress Up Game. While I mentioned earlier that I like many genres of games, I don't care all that much for dress-up games as a whole, other than Gacha Club, which is decent enough with a lot of options. Mecha Dress Up itself is completely fine, and people who like dress-up games may have a good time with this. 3 out of the 4 music tracks were pretty good and fitting for this game, though to me I can't get much more than about 10 minutes of entertainment out of this experience. The overall selection of mecha parts is really good, call me impressed. With the updated version of this game, there is even a color picker, and the color picker options are fine. However, I wish they had more shades of color. It feels a little bit limiting. Also, if there was ever an update to this game, I would really like to be able to resize all of the parts. For example, I found myself feeling like the wings were a bit big and would like to shrink them down a bit. That would be a pretty cool idea if the developers ever went back to update it more, though I'm not so sure if they would ever really do that. So for now, my hopes and dreams are crushed. Okay, that was maybe a little bit exaggerated, obviously. Anyway, moving on to the number 6 game. Number 6, the Kitten Game. The Kitten Game is a pretty fun game to me for all about 20 minutes. And I will get to why in a second, but first I want to bring up the in-game dress-up mode that it has to offer. The dress-up mode here is good, and I especially like text box option if I could speak right, because typing anything that I want is always funny, and you know, of course it is. Nolex with a knife in his mouth is both adorable and menacing. Honestly, love dress-up mode, it's very funny. Anyway, the clicking game itself is decent, and the newly added auto-clicker is pretty useful, and I couldn't imagine the game without it. While simplistic, I do find it a little enjoyable completing levels, and how the difficulty progression of said levels are. I also like the different atmospheres in each level. That's pretty neat, like all the terrains and stuff. However, what's holding it back for me, other than being simplistic, is that there aren't any difficulty settings, so not as much replay value there. Though, in hindsight, I'm not totally sure how they could change the game to add difficulties in the first place. So, yeah. I can't really fault the studio for that. Obviously. After playing the Kitten Game for a while, I realized that there isn't any more real enjoyment for me to be had. However, it's a pretty fine game on its own for an amazing collection. And for the final game on the first half, goes to number 5, Brawl Royale. Brawl Royale is a game I remember playing before getting this collection. It was difficult, yet fun to play. But now this game got a nice update, giving it 4 difficulty options, and killing, and decent death animations. Love them, really. It's awesome to see every time. What's really fascinating is that in terms of programming, it wasn't that hard for Kapo Games, at least from what I read in the history thing. That fact was honestly pretty interesting to learn. I thought it was more complex than that. The gameplay is simple to where you're supposed to press the space bar to test your reflexes in a probably tournament arena, even though that's the only input you're supposed to do and there isn't really much more than that. I didn't really notice that all too much when I was playing because of the focus I had to have for the other difficulties, making it higher on the list in the Kitten Game. Also, the 2-player portion is pretty neat for about 5 minutes. Playing it against my nephew Ethan was such a blast. Also, just for a side note, I like how the second game of Kapo Games lineup is the one where we get famous Natalie. Also, Natalie has swords. If she had them for the epic battle fantasy games, I think we'd all be pretty screwed. Loki Nolegs is in the game, and that's pretty rad. Also, with the aforementioned 2-player mode, it seems like this might be the earliest version of Lance, which, at least for me, is really cool to see. This game is definitely a nice little addition to the collection of games, especially if you're into reflex games. Number 4, Epic Battle Fantasy. You can't have an Epic Battle Fantasy collection without Epic Battle Fantasy. It's fitting that the latter half has both of the Epic Battle Fantasy games in them, but that shows where I like my RPGs. I say Epic Battle Fantasy and Brawl Royale had me think for a few minutes before deciding this game over the former. It's a fun RPG game that, while it doesn't hold up like other Epic Battle Fantasy games in my opinion, for any of you who don't know about the game, the objective is to beat all the enemies, including the boss, by defeating many consecutive waves, with a couple of shop breaks in between to buy some items that you need, like revival potions, mana, stuff like that. I personally like trying to beat the game on a hard difficulty with the limited amount of spells and items. I enjoy the game quite a bit, and it's a great start to an exceptional series in terms of having the basics of the series down. My only complaint is that this game doesn't really have much more going for it than those previously mentioned. The other games are just that much better. Of course. As I said before, not a bad game. It's decent enough for a starter in the series that has many better sequels to come. And they can be quite challenging in comparison as well. So, certainly is a good game. The third best game goes to number 3, Bullet Heaven. Before this collection, I never knew about some of Kapo Games' other titles, and oh boy was it a treat visiting Bullet Heaven. It's a solid game with upgrade mechanics and fun medals to go for. The difficulty is nice, but even players like me who aren't very good at these games can enjoy it by gathering its upgrades. It's such a blast to play and feels satisfying to beat harder challenges. There is even an endless mode as well, so that's some nice replay value there. Really good endless mode. And with its decent character roster, you could play some of your fan favorite epic battle fantasy characters, or even as a green bush, ironically enough. Literally, I'm not joking, you can play as a green bush. So I found that was kind of funny. Each character has unique main and sub attacks, and even their bomb attacks are somewhat different for each characters. So that's, replay value, really good. Appreciate that. You can also set cheats and handicaps to change the game up as you wish. The main thing holding it back at third place for me is it doesn't look quite as good as some of the other games. It's not terrible, however in comparison to the other games on this list, or Bullet Heaven 2, which looks great in comparison, the game's models are serviceable, and that's kinda it. This game is definitely deserving of the bronze medal for this ranking, for all of its fantastical elements. Number 2. Epic Battle Fantasy 2. The silver medal of this ranking goes to Epic Battle Fantasy 2. The second Battle Fantasy game for the number 2 game. How fitting, also quite unintentional. Epic Battle Fantasy 2 expands on the first game in fun ways. There still isn't an overworld yet in the series, till the third game. However, there are still amazing new features that make this game somewhat better than its predecessor. Firstly is the fact that there are save points you can use so you don't have to complete the whole game in one sitting. Next, which is a big deal for me, is that you can change turn order. As sometimes I'm not sure if I want to use Matt first, so I want to use a spell of Natalie's before I do something for Matt. So I really appreciate that. The first limit breaks that are used are here, which are awesome. Specifically my favorite ultimates for Matt and Natalie as well, which is Cleaver and Keon, respectfully. I'm so glad they're added. They're so much fun to use. To me though, the most important thing the second game added was upgrades. Being able to choose different stat bonuses and get unique upgrades to characters, such as aerial support that randomly summons the airstrike skill without cost of the turn for the user, and others, is purely amazing. Honestly, this game is just a blast to play with so much replayability. With the newly added difficulties, I could see myself playing this game for a while, testing out different upgrades and skills. However, the third game is when things shift massively, with world building and a leveling up system with a lot of upgrade options, secrets, and puzzles. Also, just to let you know, Epic Battle Fantasy 3 is free currently on Steam, so that's pretty neat. Definitely gotta check it out if you haven't. Though for sake of this video and collection, I should get back to Epic Battle Fantasy 2, which is still pretty solid, and is certainly worth completing. However, there is one more game to talk about, and that spot goes to number 1, Adventure Story. Between Bullet Heaven, Epic Battle Fantasy 2, and Adventure Story, these three are really decent games, and the three of them alone make up for the $8 in my opinion, and that answers the worth it question. I love Adventure Story, and its controller support that was added to this collection. It is really fun being able to use my USB controller, and I even got my wireless Xbox One controller working, albeit probably in large part thanks to Windows. It is definitely, like the creator said, the best way to play, well, at least for me personally. The levels in the game are all done well, and feels like a solid fun platformer with amazing fun bosses. Adventure Story also has cool upgrades and equipment to choose from, giving you a decent reason to search every nook and cranny in the levels. There aren't really any complaints I could have for it. With all the equipment options, who appeal to multiple playstyles, it's nice having active control of a character, being able to play so smoothly at that. With all 5 difficulties, whether you're bad at platformers with combat, or if you're a veteran, there is something for all skills of players. It's a shame not to see a sequel to this beautifully done game. Though, at least Kapo Games, when they remastered this one, added extra levels and stuff, so that was a nice plus. Adventure Story certainly deserves the gold medal, no doubt in my mind. Anyway, honestly, this collection was a blast to talk about, as the collection is easily worth more than the $8 that it's asking for. If I knew how fun the last 3, maybe 4 games were, I would have considered spending upwards of $12, maybe even $15. You know, I said 12 because I bet Battle Fantasy 4 and Bullet Heaven 2 are $12, so yeah. And that's not even including the cool sketchbook, monster book, and even the really neat prototypes you get in this. I particularly like the Epic Battle Fantasy 5 demo and the RPG 1, which is the precursor to Epic Battle Fantasy 1. And I'm pretty sure that was even published like before, and this is the first time seeing it, but I can't say for certain. It is overall a great collection that deserves to be checked out. Fun fact, this is also my first ever video that was done with my laptop instead of a phone, so maybe in the future I might do more of these kinds of videos. Maybe for like Flash games, or maybe play the Epic Battle Fantasy collection using a randomizer wheel to pick the game and challenge. Anyway, I will see y'all in the next video, which will probably be another year from now or something. Hopefully not, but with my track record, you know, that may just happen, to be honest. Anyway, peace out, y'all.